Hey everyone, hope you're doing really well. Now we are just into the third week of the nutrition challenge, and I just want to have a wee quick chat about carbohydrates. Now, obviously on this challenge you can tell that the carbohydrates are limited in type. Primarily, most folk are eating a lot of sweet potatoes, and they're a great go-to and super easy to cook, but you can get super sick of them at the same time, especially if you only cook them one way. So we're going to talk about a couple of things that we can do to switch stuff up in terms of the carbs and have a little chat about the other sources we can use. So if we're looking at carbohydrates, one thing we're trying to do here is limit the amount of carbohydrate and also reduce the amount of starch and processed carbohydrates. So if we're going for whole food sources, that's a great start. If we can go for low starch ones, even better. And if we can limit the amount of fructose that we're eating, then that's pretty good too. So ideally what we're aiming to do is maybe for one of the meals of the day, one of the 3 or 4 meals that you're eating that day, use fruit as the carbohydrate source. That takes one meal of sweet potatoes out. So that's a good first start. One of the other things we can look to do is change how we cook the sweet potatoes. So if you've been eating them boiled, then fair play to you, but that would boil the pants off of me. One of the other ways you can cook them that's super simple is baking them. I've probably mentioned to a lot of you, baking sweet potatoes, super easy to do. Just leave them in the skin, chuck them in the oven, about an hour at 180, you're done. Falls out the skin, bit of butter on the top, salt and pepper, you're good. There's a lot of other ways you can cook them, wedges, all these sorts of things. And the other thing that you can do to make them a little bit more interesting is you can start to cube them up super small and fry them up with some fat. So your bacon and maybe some ground beef, and you can make a breakfast hash. That's a really, really nice way of getting that carbohydrate in. You can also grate them up, and you can, if you've got a Maggi-Mix or something like that, do a load in one go. So just chuck it in the Maggi-Mix, grate it up. You've got a big bowl of that stuff, and you can just chuck that in the frying pan with some other nice tasty veggies, and that's a great way of getting the carbohydrate in. If you want to make them a little bit more interesting, you can start adding some new spices to them. So if you haven't already, salt and pepper, obviously. On top of that, paprika, really, really nice in sweet potatoes. You can even chili powder, things like that, make them spicy. Make sure that once you've cooked them, that maybe your fat for that meal, you're adding some olive oil or some butter over the top of the sweet potatoes with those spices, really good. If you want to have a little bit something that tastes a little bit more, that plays up to the sweetness of the sweet potato, chuck some cinnamon in with them. Really, really great. Baked sweet potatoes with mashed up with cinnamon through them, or wedges, really, really, really tasty. Or the hash, just add in that cinnamon. Really, really nice addition. If you want to avoid the sweet potatoes entirely for a little while, then we can try and change up the carb sources. So this kind of brings us on to other carb sources that we can use. Now, we obviously talked about fruit. So bananas, really good option. Apples, berries, all that kind of stuff. Now, if we're thinking about fruits, then we kind of want to think about, other root veg as well that could be really useful. So expanding on the sweet potatoes and the squashes, you could start to look at things like parsnips. Parsnips are a really, really great source of carbohydrate, another root veg. And if you're getting super sick of the sweet potatoes, chuck some parsnips in. If you want to, you can also grab a swede, another great option. Carrots. You could also, if you're feeling adventurous, grab a celeriac, the strange brain-looking thing that you get in the supermarket. And they're all other really great ways. Beetroot as well. If you get raw beetroot, roast it, it's great. And some of the things you can do that make this really interesting is you can chop all of those up together, not the fruit, all of those root veg up together, similar kind of sizes, a bit of olive oil and salt and pepper over the top of those, and chuck them in the oven, roast it all together, and it tastes amazing. Onion, bit of garlic in there. And that's a really super simple way to get a varied source of carbohydrate all in one go. And it's got lots of different flavors, lots of different textures, lots of different colors all coming through there. And you can mix that in with your sweet potato as well. On top of that, we probably want to discuss the carbohydrate sources and, how much carbohydrate is in each of them. For the most part in this challenge, we're really just looking to increase the quality and control the quantity. However, if you know that for yourself you're feeling like you want a little bit more carbohydrate, then the sources that are higher in carbohydrate for the amount of volume. So per 100 grams or, per portion on the tray, that you're getting a little bit more of the carbohydrate, are probably a good one to go for. So if we're looking at the different sources, if you're thinking about like white potatoes are exactly the same in terms of total carbohydrate per 100 grams and also calories per 100 grams. 90 calories, 21 grams of carbohydrate. So they're basically equitable. The main difference between them, and the reason why we're not using the white potatoes in this food challenge, is that they are significantly higher in starch. And we're wanting to try and limit the amount of starch we're taking. And we'll talk about that in a future video. Now, if we're looking at the other options, so those other root veg, parsnips, about 18 grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams and roughly 75 calories. So not far off. So if you ate the same amount of volume of parsnips as sweet potatoes, you'd have the same sort of level of energy going in and the same level of carbohydrates almost. Not far off. Now that's one group, and they are the higher carbohydrate sources. The next group is lower in carbohydrate. So if we're looking at something like this Swede here, not the same as a turnip, by the way. This Swede is about 8.6 grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams. Okay, so if you were eating that, then you would get lower amounts of carbohydrate and total calories, around about 45 for 100 grams of that. So about half. Now, if that's the source that you're going for, then maybe that's on a day that you're not doing quite so much activity, like a rest day. And I think that's, it's bringing in a little bit of carb cycling, which is a totally different subject. But just think about it like if you move a lot, you need more carbohydrates. And that's kind of the simple maths of it. So you might have one meal which is different, and then you'd have one meal that's a sweet potato. Or if you have a really high activity day, make sure you're getting in plenty of that sweet potato or higher carb sources like bananas. Bananas, again, they're about 23 grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams. This is all in the show notes down below, so head to that as well, text version of this, so you can have a look at the table. But bananas and sweet potatoes, not far off, about 90 calories and 23 grams of carbohydrates. So very, very similar. High energy days, bananas, sweet potatoes, great options. Lower energy days, your celeriac, just under 10 grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams, and again, roughly 40 calories. So very similar. In the fruit side of things, your blueberries and your apples are around about the 13-14 grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams, and roughly 50 to 60 calories. Okay. We're not calorie counting here, but it's just trying to make you aware that volume of that one little portion of the tray, what you fill it with does make a difference in terms of how much energy you're getting in. And it's just to be aware that as the challenge goes on and you maybe looking to adjust quantities a little bit to suit your needs and to suit your level of activity, then varying the source can be a really good way of doing that. Also, if you're, having 3 trays and you're a lighter individual, you might be filling to a lower line within that tray. If you were, for instance, having sweet potato, fill to that line. If you're having something like Swede or celeriac, then I would maybe up the amount and just pile it up a little bit more in there. Still be able to get the lid on, but that would be my best option for that. So that's some good tips and tricks that we can use to try and vary the sources of carbohydrate. I know some of these weren't on the original food list, and I'm kind of chucking them in now because we're getting to the point where you've probably eaten quite a lot of sweet potato, and we can get good nutrient profiles from a lot of these root veg and from the fruits as well. And I just want to sort of expand that out for you guys. We will talk more about the starch thing later on. And if there's anything else you guys want to know about that I can do in like an explanation video on, then hit me up in the comments below and we will put one of those together for you. In the show notes, there'll also be recipes that we can look at for, say, mixed root veg, and also things we can look at in terms of recipes for the individual ones themselves. A lot of the time, chop them up small, marinate them in some olive oil and some salt and pepper, some spices here and there, and roast them is the most flavoursome way that you can cook any of these vegetables. But things that you can add that make it a little bit more interesting, like for instance with your carrots, if you chop them up, marinate them, and then put lime juice over them and zest of lime, a really, really nice way of changing the flavour. You can chuck some spices in with that, makes it more Mexican tasting, some chipotle, some of these other really nice chilies, and that can really change the dynamic of that food source. So again, same with the sweet potatoes. Don't just have them the same way all the time. That'll lead to boredom. Vary it up, fry them, roast them, put them with other ingredients. You know, the fats really bring out the flavor with these. So your thumb of fat that you're adding in, you know, make that some butter over that sweet potato. It makes it so nice compared with just having it, you know, if you just had it boiled with nothing on it, it would be a completely different equation. So give that a shot. Hit me up in the comments if you've got any other questions on this, and head to the show notes to get a text version of what we've just gone over. All right, thanks guys. Have a great evening.